Usually, when we examine a major life decision, there's this ingrained cultural expectation of a cinematic clarity.
Right, like a movie montage.
Yeah, exactly. You think about those montage moments in movies where the protagonist finally slams their laptop shut, they quit their job, pack their car, and just drive across the country.
Right.
And we expect these pivot points in our lives to feel definitive. We expect them to feel empowering. But welcome to another deep dive, where today we're going to look at the somewhat unsettling reality behind those massive moments.
Unsettling is definitely the right word for it.
Because as you're listening right now, I want you to consider your own history. Have you ever looked back at a massive life event like a huge career pivot or a cross-country move or even the end of a long-term relationship and felt a weird, lingering lack of closure?
Yeah, like you didn't actually choose the outcome, but rather you were just pushed off a ledge by circumstance.
Exactly. Today, we're going to unpack exactly why that happens and how to take back the steering wheel of your life.
It's a profoundly common human experience, yet it operates almost entirely under the radar of our daily conversations.
Totally. We operate under this baseline assumption that if a monumental change occurred in our lives, well, we must have been the architects of that change.
Right, we retroactively assign ourselves the role of the decision maker, because the alternative, admitting that we were just swept along by the current, is frankly deeply uncomfortable.
And that discomfort, that illusion of control in the face of overwhelming circumstance is exactly what we're going to dismantle today. We have a set of source materials that I found incredibly revealing.
They really are. What sets this text apart immediately is its refusal to rely on typical self-help platitudes.
Right. No, awaken the giant within stuff here.
Exactly. It doesn't ask you to become this unstoppable source of nature. Instead, it begins with a much more grounded, almost poetic premise.
Oh, I love this part.
Yeah. The author defines will as, quote, a quiet flame trying to move forward, even under pressure.
A quiet flame, it implies vulnerability.
It does.
It's not a roaring inferno of undeniable bulletproof motivation that just consumes everything in its path. It's just a flicker that has to be actively protected from the wind.
And that vulnerability is the point. The central paradox we're exploring today is that true self-determination isn't about being fearless.
Right.
It's not about possessing a superhero-level confidence where anxiety ceases to exist. True self-determination is actually about learning how to act before the external pressures force your hand.
So acting before you're cornered.
Exactly. It's about nurturing that quiet flame when the winds of circumstance, biology, and your environment are actively trying to extinguish it.
So to truly understand how to nurture that flame, we first have to look at the moments when the fire is just completely smothered by the heavy blanket of life's pressures.
Yeah, the talk dives straight into what I look at as the illusion of big decisions.
It takes aim at the major life milestones, right? Changing jobs, moving to a new city, higher education.
Marriage, divorce, all of it. These are the moments where we typically assume our willpower is most active.
We assume they're the ultimate tests of our agency.
But the source argues the exact opposite. When people look back on these massive, life-altering events, they frequently experience a very fragile sense of self-determination.
Wait, really? Fragile?
Yeah. When the dust settles and they look in the rearview mirror, they often realize, wait a minute, I didn't bravely step into the unknown. I had absolutely no other options.
Oh, wow. Or like, I was just pushed into this because everything else was collapsing around me.
Precisely. The pressure had simply reached a boiling point, and the source explicitly states this isn't necessarily a sign of weakness.
Right, which I think offers a lot of grace to anyone listening who might be feeling a sense of regret or passivity about their past.
It's essentially just biology and physics. When a human being is cornered, when financial, emotional, or environmental pressure reaches an absolute limit, you are forced into a situation where you must move.
It's a mechanism of survival.
Exactly. But what's fascinating here is the critical distinction the text makes about the psychological aftermath of that movement.
So the difference between what happens in your head afterward.
Right. The source draws a hard line between a movement that is a result of being washed away by the situation and a step taken by one's own will.
From an external perspective, though, the resume looks exactly the same. You're no longer at the company. You no longer live in that city.
Yes. The factual outcome is identical.
Right.
But the internal processing is radically different. If you are washed away by a situation, you're left with this lingering feeling of, well, it couldn't be helped.
A hollow feeling.
Right. You survived, but you didn't steer. Conversely, if you move by your own will, even if the result is a total and complete catastrophe,
Even if it fails completely.
even then, You retain what the text calls the tangible feeling of having decided.
The tangible feeling, the texture of it. That implies that a choice isn't just an abstract concept, it has weight.
And what's fascinating here is how this tangible feeling slowly, almost invisibly, alters your self-efficacy over time.
Because you remember it.
Right? Every single time you're washed away by a situation, your underlying belief in your own ability to direct your life erodes just a fraction of a percent.
You start viewing yourself as a passenger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But every time you hold on to the texture of a choice, your fundamental self-trust solidifies.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to push back on the phrasing a bit. The boundary seems blurry in the real world.
Sure, let's test it.
Let's use a common scenario. Let's say you're working at a deeply toxic job. It's systematically destroying your mental health, your sleep, everything. But you stay. You endure it for years until you literally collapse from burnout and the company finally fires you.
Right.
Now, the text categorizes this as an expulsion by situation rather than a choice. You're pushed out by force majeure. But I look at that and think, isn't staying until the bitter end also a choice? I mean, you chose to endure the toxicity every single morning when your alarm went off.
It's a vital question because it gets to the heart of how we deceive ourselves about our own agency.
We think we're choosing when we're actually just freezing.
Exactly. The text clarifies that this framework is not about good or bad. It's not about assigning moral weight. It is strictly about accurately grasping the mechanical nature of the movement.
So it's an exercise in extreme honesty about the physics of the situation.
Precisely. Let's look at the physics of your toxic job scenario. When the pressure exceeds your absolute physical or psychological limit, the resulting movement is a biological or circumstantial ejection.
You didn't leave, you were thrown out.
Yes, you didn't orchestrate an exit. The environment rejected you. And because of that, the situation strips you of that crucial, tangible feeling of agency.
Oh, I see. It makes me think of a diving board. It's the difference between walking to the edge of the high dive, feeling the fear, and choosing to jump, versus standing on the edge, completely paralyzed, until the lifeguard physically pushes you off because the pool is closing.
That analogy captures the exact psychological divergence perfectly. In both scenarios, gravity takes over and you end up wet.
But only one scenario leaves you with the internal identity of being a swimmer. The other just leaves you feeling like someone who got pushed.
Exactly. The destination is the same, but the identity formation is opposite. And that brings us to how the text defines the other extreme. What does pure self-determination look like?
This is where we get into the 50% rule, right? Which I have to say completely inverted how I think about confidence.
The 50% rule is probably the most counterintuitive benchmark for self-determination in the entire source.
It's a total reevaluation of anxiety.
It really is. The text argues that if a choice has less than 5 out of 10 certainty, meaning the anxiety, the doubt, the fear of criticism, and the likelihood of failure completely outweigh the certainty of success, and you still choose to take a step forward.
Right.
That action is the absolute proof that the choice comes from your own will.
So wait, what does this all mean for us? If someone is terrified and they're only, say, 30% sure they should confess their feelings to someone or start a new business, the text is saying that the presence of that 70% terror is actually the certificate of authenticity for their willpower.
It is the ultimate certificate of authenticity.
That's wild, because we're usually taught that certainty is the prerequisite for action.
Exactly. But think about why this matters. When a choice is 90% guaranteed to succeed, when everyone agrees it's a great idea, when the risk is 0, it doesn't require much of that quiet flame.
Gravity does the heavy lifting. You just slide downhill into success.
Right. The situation is facilitating the movement, not your internal will. But stepping into the unknown, acknowledging the high probability of failure, feeling the weight of anxiety, and stepping forward anyway?
You're generating your own momentum.
Yes. You prove you aren't just being pulled by the gravity of a sure bet, and you aren't being pushed by the desperation of an expulsion. You are pure will.
I want to explicitly contrast this for you, the listener, against that expulsion dynamic. Because moving reluctantly after the pressure becomes unbearable, like waiting to get fired, is circumstantial.
The environment forces the move.
But moving, despite fear of the uncertain, is pure will.
Exactly. If you, listening right now, are feeling paralyzed by a decision because you aren't sure, the text flips the script. That uncertainty is the very medium in which your willpower is tested and proven.
The fear isn't a glitch, it's the resistance training.
Perfectly said.
But this all sounds incredibly heavy when applied to big life events. How does this play out on a random Tuesday? We aren't making massive 30% certainty leaps every day.
We aren't. And the source argues that trying to understand one's own will through massive events actually makes it harder to see.
Because there's too much noise.
Exactly. Too many variables. We have to look at daily minor events,
Yep.
and this is where the text brings in the examples of eating habits.
I love the diet examples. They strip the concept of choice down to its barest mechanics.
They really do. The source presents two scenarios.
Okay.
Example A. You eat way too many snacks in the mid-afternoon. You have no room for dinner, so you skip it.
Classic mistake.
Right. And then you inevitably wake up at 2 a.m. suffering from intense hunger.
A completely mundane chain of events. And example B.
Example B. You're on a diet, so you heavily restrict your lunch. You eat far less than you need. And as a physiological result, you suffer that same severe hunger in the middle of the night.
So in both scenarios, the destination is identical. You're staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., miserable.
Yes. But we have to deconstruct the boundary between choice and force majeure inevitability in these micro moments.
Right, where does the choice actually end?
In example A, eating the snacks at 2 p.m. was a choice. It was exercise of your will. But that subsequent hunger at 2 a.m., the text categorizes that strictly as an inevitable consequence.
It's force majeure acting on your biology.
Exactly. In example B, the midnight hunger is the result of a choice, not a state the person actively chose to be in. They chose the restriction. They didn't choose the physiological suffering.
Okay, here's my analogy for this. It's like setting up a line of dominoes. You only have the will to push the first one, the snack at 2 p.m., or skipping lunch. But every domino that falls afterward, cascading right down to the midnight hunger, is force majeure. It's gravity taking over. You aren't operating in the realm of choice anymore.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that visualization is a profound tool. It forces you to ask yourself in daily life, where exactly does my choice end, and where does the inevitable momentum of my past choices take over?
Because if you realize the 2 a.m. hunger is just physics, just dominoes falling, you can stop agonizing over it and redirect your focus back to the 2 p.m. domino.
You shift your locus of control back to where your agency actually existed.
But what if you're trapped in a loop? You keep pushing the wrong dominoes, you keep waking up miserable, and you know it's toxic.
The text introduces a specific concept for the moment you decide the cycle has to break. It calls this the 0 point.
The 0 point, so hitting rock bottom.
Essentially, yes. It's defined as the moment in the accumulation of daily life when you reach the peak of a negative state and think, quote, I don't want to repeat this anymore.
It's an active rejection of the pattern.
Right. Returning to the dieter, caught in a cycle of overeating and rebounding. The exact moment they feel they must end this pattern is the true starting line. That's the 0 point.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though, because I see a trap here.
What kind of trap?
Well, a lot of people hit that 0 point of being fed up, but they just wallow in it. They get fed up with their messy house or bad job, and they just say, I hate this, but they don't change anything. How is this different from just complaining?
It's a critical distinction. The text clarifies that the negative emotion itself, being utterly fed up, is merely a spark.
It's not the flame itself.
Exactly. It only becomes a functional 0 point if it's used as a springboard to face the immediate hurdles that come next.
Because what happens immediately after the 0 point is where it gets tough, right?
Right. The source states that the moment you try to move toward a healthy choice, you will inevitably face temptation, anxiety, and this overwhelming feeling of, this is a hassle.
The hassle, that might be the most insidious enemy of the quiet flame.
It really is. The willingness to face that hassle, to move despite those immediate micro roadblocks, is the true core of one's will.
So nurturing this willingness in daily choices is what leads to massive long-term self-transformation.
Yeah.
But, hitting rock bottom or the 0 point still sounds a bit like being pushed by circumstances. You're waiting to get miserable before you act. Is there a way to act before we get miserable?
There is. And this leads to perhaps the most significant paradigm shift in the source text. Acting preemptively before the pressure exceeds the limit.
The preemptive shift.
Exactly. Because moving after you hit the point of I can't take it anymore dilutes your agency. Preemptive action means moving toward your desired direction before that breaking point.
So back to the diet example. Instead of looping on, I ate too much, I'll try tomorrow, preemptive action is planning ahead.
Right. It's asking, what will I choose when I start getting hungry later?
It's sitting down at 10 a.m. when you aren't hungry and making a plan.
Because waiting for strong resolve is a trap.
Oh, this part blew my mind. We constantly wait for strong resolve.
And strong resolve usually only forms after a pile of negative experiences. If you wait for it, you remain trapped in the loop of moving while being pushed by situations.
You're waiting for the crisis to give you the resolve.
Exactly. This isn't merely about planning. The text calls it a fundamental shift in posture from reacting to preparing.
But isn't this just basic time management or meal prepping? Why does the text elevate this to a philosophical level?
Because of the psychological weight these preemptive actions carry over time, it's about self-trust.
Building a track record.
Yes. Securing small, conscious options, like prepping a lunch or having an alternative action ready for when temptation hits before you even need them, builds a tangible track record of I am choosing.
You're insulating your willpower.
Right. When you look back and see the traces of you acting consciously before an emergency, it forms the very bedrock of trusting yourself in the world.
Okay, but human memory is incredibly flawed. How do we hold on to this self-trust? If I prep my meals on Tuesday, by Friday, I've completely forgotten about it.
The source recognizes this, which is why it advocates for actively quantifying and visualizing our actions, specifically putting them on a graph.
See, I read that and immediately cringed. I hate tracking habits on spreadsheets. It feels so corporate.
This raises an important question, though, because the text is very careful to distinguish this from typical productivity tracking.
So it's not a habit streak app.
Not at all. It's not for progress management, motivation tracking, or calculating success rates. It is strictly to make the traces of one's will visible.
Providing an objective witness to your agency.
Yes. And the source introduces the concept of foresight, or senkin, in the original Japanese context.
And it's important to note, foresight isn't about being a psychic predicting a distant future, right?
Exactly. It's the daily habit of making an immediate choice while being slightly aware of what happens next.
Pushing the 2 p.m. domino while keeping your eyes on the 3 p.m. domino.
That's foresight. Now, why do we need a graph for this? Because emotions and intentions are incredibly vague.
Oh, totally. A feeling like I did well today evaporates by the weekend.
Right. Or a heavy feeling like I'm being washed away lately will completely overwrite your actual efforts. Visualizing turns fading feelings into hard facts.
So if a graph shows a dip in my preemptive actions, like for 2 weeks I stopped prepping my lunch, I can look back and do a factual self-analysis.
Exactly. You can ask, was I losing to external pressure that week, or was I acting on my own will?
But does this mean every time we resist a cookie, we need a data point? Because that sounds exhausting.
The text clarifies this stance beautifully. It's not about the cookie. It's about drawing a portrait of your quiet flame.
A portrait. I like that.
The graph's wave isn't a grade on a test. It's literal proof of life that you tried to move with intention that day.
It's evidence that you attempted to hold the steering wheel, even if you swerved.
Precisely. Which synthesizes the text's concluding thoughts perfectly. 100% pure self-determination is a myth.
That feels like such a relief, honestly. After all this talk of will, it admits we can't be 100% in control.
Absolutely. Human choices are always influenced by situations, emotions, biology, and other people.
We're swimming in a pool with currents we didn't create.
Right. So the goal is never perfection, but simply increasing the percentage or the ratio of actions driven by your own will.
So if you're currently 80% reactive, the goal is just to get to 75% tomorrow.
Exactly. Review the formula provided by the source. Taking steps with less than 50% certainty, plus building habits to move before pressure hits, plus recording the traces of these actions.
And that equals the gradual growth of self-determination.
Yes. People look for giant cinematic decisions to change their lives, but the text argues that the true texture of life is altered quietly through the continuity of tiny choices.
What to eat, how to face daily temptations moving before being cornered. So, speaking directly to you, listening right now, this means you don't need to quit your job or move across the country today to take back your life. You just need to ask yourself one question in your daily routine. Am I moving right now by my own will, or am I being pushed?
It's an incredibly powerful diagnostic question.
Well, let's wrap up this deep dive. We've gone from understanding the tragedy of situational expulsion, where you feel completely pushed by life, to the empowering realization that 50% anxiety actually means you're in the driver's seat.
Right, and then down to the micro battles of snacks and foresight.
And finally, the power of graphing your quiet flame as proof of life. It's been a phenomenal journey. But before we go, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Where are we taking this?
So, building on the source, but taking it one step further, the text talks about graphing your past traces of will to build self-trust. But what if the very act of you sitting here, listening to this deep dive and questioning whether your past choices were yours or just force majeure?
Yeah.
What if that exact moment of uncomfortable reflection is actually the very first spark of your quiet flame for the next massive decision of your life?
Oh, wow. That's a beautiful reframing.
Right. The anxiety you feel looking back is the fuel for looking forward. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep tending to that quiet flame. We'll catch you on the next one.